One morning, the wife disappeared without a trace. Her absence sent shockwaves through the community, sparking frantic searches and raising questions that no one could yet answer. Her husband claimed she had gone for an early morning run, something she did regularly. But something about his story felt off. But these were only pieces of a puzzle that, when fully assembled, revealed a terrifying truth. The story would forever leave a haunting impression, echoing the heartbreaking reality that sometimes the people we trust the most can lead us down a path of unimaginable darkness. A woman who refused to submit to her partner's controlling, repressive rules. She sought her freedom, a life without the suffocating restrictions placed upon her by her partner. Tragically, her rebellion against this abusive dynamic cost her everything. Her life was cut short, and the question that lingers is whether there was a clear pattern of abuse in this family, or whether the public simply needed someone to blame. Someone to hold responsible for this senseless tragedy. Was the husband truly an abuser, or was he painted as such to provide an easy answer for the wife's murder? It all started in the town of Cary, North Carolina, USA. Cary is the kind of place where people feel so secure that, after living there for a while, they stop locking their cars, and some even leave their front doors unlocked. It's a town devoid of crime, with no visible racial tensions, great schools, smooth roads, and friendly neighbors who always greet each other with a smile. This seemingly idyllic town was the place Brad and Nancy Cooper chose to build their life, raise their family, and pursue happiness. To the outside world, the Coopers appeared to have it all. Brad was a smart and successful IT engineer, and Nancy was everything you'd expect in a loving, dedicated mother. She was athletic, beautiful, lively, and devoted to her two young daughters. Together, Brad and Nancy led a quiet, peaceful life, or so it seemed. Brad focused on his work, while Nancy took care of the household and the children. A former competitive runner, Nancy made a point of staying in great shape and taking care of her health. But beneath this perfect exterior, something much darker was brewing, something that would ultimately lead to unimaginable heartbreak. July 12, 2008, started out like any other Saturday morning for the Cooper family. Nancy went out for her usual morning run, something she did regularly as part of her commitment to staying fit. But on that day, she didn't come back. What followed was a series of events that were disturbing, perplexing, and filled with unanswered questions. The story is so tragic that it left everyone, family, friends, and even strangers who followed the case, with an overwhelming sense of loss and a desperate hope for justice. That afternoon, Nancy's close friend Jessica Adam called emergency services, her voice trembling as she reported Nancy missing. Jessica explained that Nancy had gone for a run at 7 a.m. and had not returned. The two friends had plans to meet later that morning, but Nancy never showed up. Jessica had been trying to reach her friend for hours, calling both Nancy's cell phone and her home phone, but received no response. Meanwhile, Brad, who was at work, appeared unconcerned by his wife's disappearance. He assumed Nancy had simply gone for a longer walk than usual and would return soon. Yet, as the day wore on and Nancy remained missing, alarm bells started to ring. In trying to understand where Nancy might have gone, we need to look more closely at the history of the Cooper family. Perhaps by examining the past, we can uncover some answers, some clues that might explain the tragedy that unfolded. Nancy Rentz was born on October 25, 1973, into a family that prided itself on loving and supporting others. In the 1960s, Harry Renz and Donna Audrey, both graduates of the University of British Columbia, decided to marry and build a life together. They eventually had 4 children, a son, Jeff, and 3 daughters, Krista, Jill, and Nancy. The family lived in Edmonton, Alberta, and Harry and Donna raised their children in a home filled with warmth, love, and encouragement. In 1988, Harry and Donna started an employment agency, helping individuals in Alberta with life management skills, job training, and employment services. They were a family deeply rooted in community and service, offering help to others while nurturing a supportive environment for their children. In 1998, when Nancy was just 25 years old, she met Brad Cooper in Calgary. He was tall, dark-haired, and exuded a calm, steady presence, qualities that immediately drew her in. But it wasn't just Brad's looks that captivated Nancy. It was his reliability, his unwavering demeanor, and his ability to remain grounded even in stressful situations. Nancy, in contrast, was vibrant, tall, blonde, and physically fit. She had a quiet charisma that lit up a room, a quality that piqued Brad's interest. The mutual attraction quickly blossomed into a serious relationship. Their romance moved fast. When Brad was offered a prestigious job at Cisco Systems in Raleigh, North Carolina, he asked Nancy to move with him. Wanting to be together and recognizing the difficulties that immigration would pose, they decided to marry in the fall of 2000, speeding up their marriage plans originally set for 2002. Their union, while on the surface driven by love, was also tied to the practicalities of moving across borders. However, it seemed like a logical next step for two people in love, ready to build a life together in a new country. Once in North Carolina, Brad's career took a sharp turn for the better. He quickly made a name for himself as a networking expert, working as an engineer and architect. With his career taking off, the Coopers lived a comfortable and successful life. Brad's accomplishments were impressive. He specialized in integrating internet technologies and phones, becoming one of just 152 experts in his field globally. This expertise secured the couple's financial stability, allowing them to enjoy a comfortable suburban life. The Coopers had their own house, complete with 2 luxury BMW parked in the driveway. On the outside, it seemed like they had achieved the American dream. But inside their home, Nancy's life told a different story. Although she had moved to the U.S. to be with Brad, her dreams and ambitions were put on hold. Nancy, still a Canadian citizen, was unable to work legally without a permit. The immigration system that had allowed her to move with Brad now confined her to the role of a stay-at-home mom. And while she loved her daughters, Bella, born in 2004, and Katie, born in 2006, Nancy longed for something more. She wanted a career, a purpose beyond being a wife and mother. The neighborhood saw Nancy as a loving, attentive mother. She was frequently spotted at the local playground, playing with her daughters and engaging with other moms. She was deeply involved in her children's lives, and to an outsider, it seemed like she had everything. But internally, Nancy struggled. She had once been a competitive runner, training to compete in the Olympics before a knee injury shattered that dream. Even after her Olympic hopes faded, she remained passionate about running, participating in marathons and helping others find joy in the sport. Running was her release, her connection to the part of herself that hadn't yet faded. However, Brad, an introvert, disliked Nancy's growing social circle. Her friendships with other runners, her involvement in races, and the joy she derived from those relationships irked him. As Nancy continued to build a life for herself outside of the home, through her running community and her friendships, the cracks in her marriage to Brad began to show. Friends close to the couple noted that their relationship had issues from the beginning, but Nancy rarely spoke openly about their problems. Instead, she painted an idealized version of her husband, never revealing the depth of their marital strife. Brad's need for control manifested in small ways at first, ways that could be easily overlooked. He made decisions for Nancy without consulting her, controlled the family finances, and became more critical of her choices. Over time, these behaviors escalated, slowly chipping away at Nancy's independence and self-worth. While Brad advanced professionally, Nancy's life felt smaller and more confined. Her desire to work, to contribute beyond the home, was stifled by legal and practical barriers. The isolation of being a stay-at-home mom without a career to call her own weighed heavily on her. As Nancy's marriage to Brad grew more strained, she began to find solace in her running community. Running was one of the few things she still had control over, and it connected her to people who valued her for more than just being Brad's wife or Bella and Katie's mom. But her efforts to carve out a space for herself in this new world only exacerbated the tension in her marriage. Brad's introverted nature and need for control made it difficult for him to accept Nancy's newfound social life, and he became increasingly resentful of her friendships and her time away from home. The tension between them reached a boiling point as Brad's manipulative tendencies became more pronounced. His once steady and calm demeanor morphed into something more sinister. A quiet, insidious form of control that left Nancy feeling trapped. She had given up so much for their life together, but it was never enough for Brad. As he continued to climb the corporate ladder, his expectations of Nancy only grew more unrealistic. He wanted her to fit into a narrow mold of what he believed a wife and mother should be, and any deviation from that mold was met with criticism or disapproval. Nancy's life, once full of potential and dreams, had become suffocating. She had entered the marriage with hopes of building a life together, but instead, she found herself living in Brad's shadow, her own identity slowly eroding. Yet she kept up appearances, continuing to be the perfect wife and mother in public, while privately struggling to hold on to the pieces of herself that remained. In the end, Nancy's attempts to assert her independence, through running, through her friendships, through her desire for more than what Brad offered, only deepened the rift in their relationship. What began as a promising love story had turned into a prison for Nancy, one in which she had to constantly navigate Brad's growing need for control and his diminishing respect for her. The marriage that had once been full of promise was now suffused with tension, manipulation, and an overwhelming sense of loss for the woman Nancy once was. Things took a darker turn in Nancy Cooper's marriage when she discovered that her husband, Brad, had been unfaithful with someone she considered a close friend. In the spring of 2007, Nancy learned about Brad's affair with Heather, a revelation that shattered any remaining trust she had in him. Heather wasn't just a stranger. She was someone from Nancy's inner circle, which made the betrayal all the more painful. At first, Brad denied the affair, sticking to his story for months, but the truth eventually came out. On New Year's Eve, during what should have been a celebratory time, Brad confessed to the affair but minimized it, claiming it had only happened once, as if that fact somehow softened the blow. His attempt to downplay the situation by suggesting that one time didn't count was not only insulting, but a clear indication of how little he understood or cared about the emotional wreckage he had caused. In an attempt to salvage their marriage, the couple decided to try therapy. But during those sessions, Brad's lies unraveled even further. He admitted that the affair had been ongoing for a long time and that he had kept it from Nancy in a desperate attempt to maintain their image of a normal family. This second confession broke whatever fragile bond was left between them. The betrayal was too deep, the trust too fractured. Therapy, instead of saving their marriage, only revealed more secrets, and they eventually decided to separate. It became clear that their relationship had reached its endpoint. As part of their separation, the couple agreed to sell their home and divide their assets. Nancy planned to move back to Canada with their daughters, Bella and Katie, hoping to start fresh with the support of her family. Her dreams of returning to her homeland offered her a chance at rebuilding her life, far from the heartbreak and suffocation she felt in North Carolina. But Brad wasn't willing to let her leave so easily, especially when it came to their children. He had no intention of giving up custody or allowing the girls to move to Canada with their mother. What had started as a bitter end to their marriage turned into a custody battle. Brad, fueled by resentment and a need to maintain control, took drastic steps to prevent Nancy from leaving. In a calculated move, Brad canceled Nancy's credit cards, cutting her off financially. Without access to funds, Nancy was trapped. Alone in a foreign country, without money and with 2 young children to care for, Nancy faced a daunting and isolating reality. Brad's actions left her vulnerable, with no clear way out. Her once promising life had now become a struggle for basic survival. It was in the midst of this escalating turmoil that Nancy disappeared. When word spread about the Coopers' rocky marriage and impending separation, friends, neighbors, and the authorities immediately turned their suspicions toward Brad. The timing of her disappearance was too coincidental, given the bitter conflicts over their children and the power Brad still held over her life. Nancy's parents, Harry and Donna Renz, were devastated when they received the news that their daughter was missing. They knew she had been planning to return to Canada with her daughters, but now they were gripped by fear. In the hours following Nancy's disappearance, police arrived at the Cooper household to question Brad. His account of the morning raised more questions than answers. According to Brad, Nancy had woken up earlier than usual on Saturday and left for a run with a friend. Brad claimed that she hadn't taken her cell phone or house keys with her, a detail that struck the police as odd. Nancy was a seasoned runner, training for a half marathon, and she had a set routine. She usually met her running partner at a nearby coffee shop before starting her jog. Yet, according to Brad, she had deviated from this routine on the day she disappeared, choosing to run on an unfamiliar path without notifying anyone. The more the police probed, the more skeptical they became of Brad's story. No one had seen Nancy leave that morning. In fact, the last time anyone other than Brad saw her was the previous evening when she was visiting a friend across the street. There were no witnesses to confirm Brad's claim that Nancy had left the house at 7 a.m., and no one saw her jogging in the neighborhood that day. Suspicion grew as the hours passed, and friends and family began to fear the worst. A search party was quickly organized to find Nancy. Could she have run away to escape her troubled marriage? Her friends didn't think so. Nancy was devoted to her children, and there was no way she would have left without taking Bella and Katie with her. As the search intensified, those closest to Nancy hoped she had simply gone off the grid for a while, perhaps seeking a temporary escape from her tumultuous home life. But as the days wore on, their hope faded, replaced by a growing dread. On July 14, 2008, just 2 days after Nancy was reported missing, the search came to a tragic end. A man walking his dog discovered a woman's body in a drainage ditch, approximately 3 miles from the Cooper home. The body was lying face down in the water, partially submerged in the ditch. The woman was wearing a sports bra, and a single diamond earring was still in one ear. The man immediately called the police, who arrived on the scene and identified the body as Nancy Cooper. The autopsy revealed that Nancy had been strangled to death, her hyoid bone broken, a common injury in cases of manual strangulation. The medical examiner found no signs of sexual assault, but the brutal manner of her death left no doubt that this was a homicide. Nancy's once promising life had been violently taken, and the question on everyone's mind was, who would want to kill her? With Nancy's body discovered and the cause of death confirmed as strangulation, investigators shifted their focus to finding the person responsible. The most obvious suspect was Brad. He had motive: his anger over their impending separation and custody battle, his financial control over Nancy, and the recent uncovering of his affair. Friends of Nancy told police that she had been fearful of Brad in the weeks leading up to her death, worried that his manipulative behavior was becoming more aggressive. As the investigation continued, more and more circumstantial evidence seemed to point to Brad. His behavior during Nancy's disappearance was scrutinized, and many people began to wonder whether his calm, collected demeanor was a facade hiding something darker. The unraveling of the Cooper marriage, marked by infidelity, control, and bitterness, appeared to have culminated in an unspeakable tragedy. But proving Brad's guilt would require more than suspicion. It would require concrete evidence that could link him to the murder of his wife. When police first interviewed Brad Cooper on the day his wife Nancy went missing, they observed several small red marks and scratches on the back of his neck. This detail was noted in the police report but left unexplained. Brad didn't offer a reason for the scratches, and investigators didn't press him for one at that moment. Nonetheless, this seemingly minor observation would later become a piece of the puzzle in the investigation into Nancy Cooper's mysterious disappearance and death. Another significant point was that no one, other than Brad, had seen Nancy after she left the Friday night party at a neighbor's house, which she attended alone. In the early stages of their investigation, Brad Cooper naturally became their primary focus. After all, the husband is often the first suspect in homicide investigations, particularly in cases involving a missing spouse. And Brad had been the last person to claim to have seen Nancy alive. The tension between the couple's recent marital issues, marked by Brad's affair and the couple's pending separation, only intensified the scrutiny on Brad. Detectives felt that the circumstances surrounding Nancy's disappearance were too suspicious to ignore. On the surface, Brad seemed cooperative and calm, but the more police dug into the details of his account, the more inconsistencies began to surface. A series of overnight warrants were issued to search the Coopers' home, their 2 cars, and Brad himself. The urgency with which the police treated the home and vehicles as potential crime scenes indicated they believed that time was of the essence. They used luminol to search for bloodstains and combed the residence for any traces of evidence that might link Brad to Nancy's death. In addition to these searches, investigators collected Brad's hair, fingerprints, and DNA samples for comparison against any evidence they might find either at the crime scene or on Nancy's body. One of the complexities of this investigation stemmed from the fact that Brad and Nancy had shared a life. They lived in the same house, used the same cars, and touched many of the same items daily. Any evidence found would first need to be contextualized within the framework of a married couple living under one roof. However, some details uncovered during the investigation raised eyebrows. For instance, on the morning Nancy disappeared, Brad told police that he had spent his time cleaning the house. He had done laundry, vacuumed, and mopped the floors. Investigators found this odd, especially considering Nancy had not returned from her run, and no one knew where she was. More peculiar still was Brad's admission that he had purchased bleach and other cleaning supplies the day before. While it's not uncommon for people to clean their homes regularly, the timing of Brad's sudden deep cleaning spree on the very day his wife vanished seemed suspicious to law enforcement. Investigators later took several boxes and bags of potential evidence from the Cooper household, all of which would need to be processed to see if any of it was connected to Nancy's death. Among these items were cleaning supplies, some of Brad's clothing, and a variety of household items. Brad's explanation for the thorough cleaning he undertook didn't sit well with investigators. According to written police testimony, Brad's story didn't align with interviews from friends and neighbors who knew the couple well. These friends claimed Brad had never been particularly fastidious about cleaning during their marriage. Another curious detail emerged when police discovered that Brad had cleaned the trunk of Nancy's car but left the interior untouched. When questioned about this, Brad claimed that he had spilled gasoline in the trunk and needed to clean it out. Yet investigators found no traces of gasoline or any cleaning fluid smell in the trunk. This strange inconsistency further heightened police suspicions about Brad's potential involvement in Nancy's disappearance. By this time, investigators had built a strong enough case to consider Brad Cooper the prime suspect in Nancy's death. The couple's personal life was dissected by police and prosecutors, revealing that both Brad and Nancy, Canadian citizens, had been in the process of a bitter separation. Nancy had made plans to move back to Canada with their 2 daughters, Bella and Katie, while Brad was unwilling to let her go without a fight. In April 2008, just months before Nancy's death, Brad had removed Nancy's name from their joint bank accounts and canceled her credit cards, effectively cutting her off financially. He also took possession of the children's passports, preventing her from leaving the country with the kids. As the investigation deepened, detectives turned their attention to Brad's computer. In high-profile cases such as this one, a suspect's digital footprint often reveals clues about their mindset and potential actions. Detectives searched Brad's computer for evidence that might indicate premeditation, looking for documents or internet searches on how to kill someone or dispose of a body. While Brad's background as a tech-savvy individual made the search more complicated, investigators were determined to leave no stone unturned. During cross-examination in court, Detective Adam Dismukes testified about certain aspects of the crime scene that suggested foul play. Specifically, the front hallway of the Cooper home raised red flags. Dismukes noted that the hallway's condition seemed indicative of a possible struggle, one that might have taken place when Nancy returned from the party the night before she was reported missing. Could this have been the location where Nancy's life was violently taken? As evidence mounted against Brad, his calm and collected demeanor started to crack. It became clear that the investigation was building a compelling narrative. Brad, embroiled in a failing marriage, fearful of losing custody of his children, and frustrated by his wife's plans to leave the country, had been driven to a violent and irreversible act. The affair, financial disputes, and control issues all painted a picture of a man desperate to maintain his grip on a life that was slipping through his fingers. Yet, despite all this circumstantial evidence, no one could definitively place Brad at the scene of Nancy's death. The prosecution would need more than suspicion to convict him. They needed concrete proof, something that would irrefutably tie Brad to the murder. Investigators were confident that such proof existed, whether it was hidden in the house, the cars, or the digital data retrieved from Brad's computer. But as the investigation continued, Brad remained a free man, albeit one under intense scrutiny. Public opinion swayed heavily against him. In the quiet town of Cary, North Carolina, the brutal murder of Nancy Cooper had shocked the community, and many believed justice had not yet been served. Friends of Nancy, who had witnessed the unraveling of her marriage and the toll it had taken on her, were vocal in their belief that Brad was responsible for her death. However, the legal system would demand more than belief. It would demand proof, and for now, that proof was still being pieced together by law enforcement. As investigators pored over the evidence from the Cooper home, examining dozens of photos taken while the case was still being treated as a missing person investigation, defense attorney Howard Kurtz mounted a vigorous challenge to the prosecution's case. Kurtz, representing Brad Cooper, methodically questioned Detective Adam Dismukes, aiming to create doubt that the evidence pointed to Brad's guilt in the murder of his wife, Nancy Cooper. One point of contention involved the photos of the Cooper home, specifically the foyer area. Some of the photographs showed small decorative items, such as bamboo sticks in a vase and a pair of decorative ducks that had been on a credenza, missing between the afternoon of July 11, 2008, when Nancy had been home, and the next day when the investigation commenced. These items, police believed, may have been displaced during a struggle between Brad and Nancy. Kurtz, however, was quick to argue that the scene didn't support the idea of a violent altercation. He pointed out that other items, such as a lamp in the hallway, remained undisturbed. There were no scuff marks or obvious signs of a struggle on the floor. Additionally, Kurtz emphasized that many other objects in the house had not been touched. The glass coffee table in the living room, for example, was intact, with no signs of disarray. Similarly, the couple's home office, including the computer equipment that Brad used regularly, was undisturbed. This careful line of questioning aimed to weaken the prosecution's assertion that a struggle occurred in the home, suggesting instead that the house remained in normal order. Despite the defense's effort to cast doubt on the evidence, the prosecution argued that the signs were clear. During a later interview, Brad Cooper acknowledged that he felt the investigators had already marked him as their prime suspect. Based on police testimony, Brad had strangled Nancy in their home on the morning of July 12, 2008, after she returned from a neighbor's party. He then transported her body and dumped it a few miles away, where it was later discovered. "I believe Nancy Cooper came home early on the morning of July 12, and Mr. Cooper killed her," Detective Dismukes testified, summarizing the police's theory of the crime. With enough circumstantial evidence in hand, Brad Cooper was arrested in October 2008, over 3 months after Nancy's body was found in a drainage ditch, approximately 3 miles from their home in Cary, North Carolina. His trial, however, did not begin until more than 2 years later, in March 2011, during which both the prosecution and defense presented their cases in a trial that would stretch over 36 days. The prosecution leaned heavily on circumstantial evidence, bolstered by testimony from friends and family who detailed Brad and Nancy's turbulent marriage. Brad, they argued, had become increasingly controlling and abusive as the couple's relationship deteriorated. Nancy, who had once been financially dependent on Brad due to her inability to work in the United States without a visa, was gradually seeking independence. She had expressed a desire to return to Canada with their 2 daughters and start over, away from the crumbling marriage and Brad's manipulative behavior. The prosecution also pointed to Brad's affair as a motive. Brad's infidelity, which had initially come to light in early 2007, had rocked the marriage, and while the couple had attempted therapy, the damage had already been done. Nancy's friends testified that she had planned to divorce Brad and return to Canada with the children, but Brad's desire to control the situation and prevent her from leaving boiled over. According to the prosecution, Brad's increasing frustration, fear of losing his children, and the prospect of an expensive divorce led him to commit murder to solve his problems once and for all. The prosecution's case was bolstered by digital evidence from Brad's computer. 2 FBI agents, Special Agents Gregory Johnson and Chris Chappelle, testified that Brad had conducted internet searches for maps of the exact area where Nancy's body was found. This discovery was pivotal in convincing the jury that Brad had not only killed his wife, but had planned how to dispose of her body in a place he believed would be difficult to find. Jury foreman Andy Gilbert later revealed that this testimony was critical in helping the jurors connect the dots. The evidence presented by the FBI agents made a lot of the other circumstantial evidence more relevant and credible. Gilbert said after the trial, "Nearly 100 witnesses had testified, and the trial spanned over a month as prosecutors painstakingly laid out their case that Brad, an angry and frustrated man, had coldly and calculatingly murdered his wife in the early hours of July 12, 2008. According to prosecutors, Brad had been having affairs with several women at the time of Nancy's death, including a neighbor. Nancy, on the other hand, had been trying to escape the marriage. Court documents revealed that Brad had attempted suicide multiple times as a teenager, and again more recently in the winter before Nancy's death. Throughout the trial, Brad Cooper maintained his innocence, but it took the jury of 10 women and 2 men 10 hours to reach a unanimous verdict of first-degree murder. On May 5, 2011, Brad was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It marked the conclusion of Wake County's longest non-death penalty murder trial. Brad Cooper's defense team firmly believed that they had a strong case for appealing his conviction. They argued that crucial evidence was withheld from the jury, particularly regarding Brad's laptop. According to the defense, the laptop had been tampered with, possibly compromising the digital evidence that played a significant role in the prosecution's case. This, they claimed, was one of several ignored avenues in the investigation that could have cast doubt on Brad's guilt. They argued that investigators had tunnel vision, focusing solely on the Brad did it theory, while disregarding other potential leads that could have identified Nancy's real killer or killers. In 2013, he appealed to have his conviction overturned, citing errors in the trial, particularly regarding the admission of certain evidence. His defense argued that the FBI digital evidence was improperly presented and should not have been allowed. However, while his conviction was reviewed, the case was not retried in full. But in 2015, a twist occurred. At the age of 40, Brad Cooper pleaded guilty in Wake County Superior Court to the second-degree murder of his wife, Nancy, bringing an end to years of legal battles. During his court appearance, Brad finally acknowledged his actions in public. When asked by the judge if he killed Nancy and dumped her body in a ditch in Cary, North Carolina in 2008, Brad answered, "Yes." This marked the first time he had openly admitted to the crime in a court of law, something he had vehemently denied for years. He had initially been convicted of first-degree murder in 2011, but in a significant development, the North Carolina Court of Appeals overturned that conviction. The reason? There were concerns about the fairness of his trial, particularly surrounding the digital evidence and the manner in which it had been presented to the jury. As a result, Brad was given a new deal. He would plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a reduced sentence. This plea, however, effectively ended his fight for custody of his daughters, as he forfeited his parental rights. Nancy's twin sister was awarded custody of the 2 girls. Judge Paul Gessner sentenced him to 12 years in prison, with credit given for the 5 years he had already served. This reduced sentence marked a stark contrast to his original life sentence without the possibility of parole. It was a bittersweet resolution for both the prosecution and Nancy's family. While Brad's confession provided the closure, they sought an admission of guilt. It also meant that he would eventually be released from prison. The unfaithful husband who had strangled his wife in a moment of rage, then dumped her body in a drainage ditch, would not spend the rest of his life behind bars as initially believed. Brad Cooper served his 12-year sentence at the Mountain View Correctional Institution in Spruce Pine, North Carolina. On November 23, 2020, he was released from prison, having completed his time behind bars. However, his release didn't mean freedom. Immediately upon leaving the correctional facility, Brad was taken into custody by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. As a Canadian citizen, he was deported back to Canada, where he now reportedly lives.